healthy enough? Hey everyone, I'm Valentina. Welcome to my sewing vlog. I'm so excited because this is already my 10th full video. And over this time, I've noticed one thing. In almost every video, I forget to properly show or explain the seams I use. So I throw enough of that. This video is going to be ultimate tutorial about my favorite seams. I'll show you everything, explain everything, simple, clear and super visual. It's going to be useful, packed with info and hopefully inspiring too. So get comfy, let's dive in. Back in design school, the very first thing we learned was seams. That was the real foundation. If I remember correctly, our very first exam was actually on seams. And I clearly remember how we practiced them. Today I'll be showing you a lot of technical seam diagrams. But honestly, what I enjoyed the most was sewing mockups. I just love when you can not only see but also touch, test and compare everything with your hands. For this video, I've prepared some mockups in advance, just simple rectangles made from muslin fabric. Mine are about 15 by 12 centimeters, but of course you can make them in any size that works for you. I finished the edge with pinking shears just to keep the fabric from frying, super handy. Here's what I'll be using: a sewing machine, an overlocker, serger, and steam generator iron. The needle are standard size 90 on 14 and the threads are regular. I choose black and some colored ones for better contrast so you can clearly see each seams. I've divided all seams into 4 main blocks. First, joining seams. Second one, edge finishing seams. Third, bias bound seams. And fourth, overlocker seams. And of course, I explaining when and where each seam is best used and which fabrics they work well with. So, without further ado, let's get started. Plain seam or stitched seam. This is the most basic original type of seam, the one everything starts with. Take 2 fabric pieces and place them right side together, align the raw edge carefully and stitch along the seam line. That's it. Now it's time to press. First, press the seam flat. This is called setting the seam to make it nice and smooth. Then you have 2 options for finishing. Press open. This means you press the seam allowances to opposite side. Press to one side. In this case, you press both seam allowances in the same direction. Which one you choose depends on the fabrics, the garments, or just personal preference. This type of seam is used everywhere. In garment, home decor, you name it. And to reduce frying, I like to trim the edge with pinking shears. The lapped seam with an enclosed raw edge is one of my absolute favorites. First, press the raw edge of one piece to the wrong side about 0.7 to 1 centimeters, depending on how much you want to turn under. Then, place this piece on top of the right side of the second piece with the folded edge facing out, nice and even. Next, top stitch 1 mm from the folded edge, staying close to the fold for a clean look. After that, press the seam flat and trim the seam allowance of the bottom layer close to be stitching. This helps avoid bulk. Now it's time for the second row of top stitching, parallel to the first one, about 1 presser foot width away. Give it one more good press to finish everything off nicely. I often use this seam to patch pockets. It's not only neat and decorative, but also super durable. It looks especially great on denim, gabardine, and cotton. I just love when everything looks clean, tidy, and professionally done. French seam, I absolutely love it. It's one of the neatest, cleanest seam out there. To make it, you start by placing the fabric pieces wrong side together and sew with a seam allowances of about 0.5 centimeters. Then press the seam and press the allowances open. Next, turn everything wrong side out. Press again and trim the seam allowances down to 1 or 2 millimeters so nothing sticks out from the inside. After that, you sew a second seam about 0.5 or 0.7 centimeters from the folded edge, and voila! All the raw edges are enclosed inside, no frying, and the result looks super clean. This seam is a lifesaver when working with lightweight or frying fabrics, but honestly, I used it almost everywhere. It's so tidy and strong that I want to sew everything with it. And now a little personal story, personal sidebar. When I was a kid, my mom told me how to do this seam, and she used to call it the grain sack seam, like the kind used for flour or rice bags. Back then, I sewed a bunch of bags and pouches for my dad as gifts. Using my little hand crank sewing machine. He works in the fields, so he really needed them. And ever since, the French seam has been more than just a technique. It's a small warm memory from my childhood. The flat felt seam, also known as jean seams, is one of the strongest and neatest seams out there. We start by placing the fabric pieces wrong side together, aligning the raw edges and measuring 1.5 centimeters from the edge. Then we stitch along the right side. After that, we press the seam and trim one of the seam allowances down to 0.5 centimeters. Next, we fold the remaining seam allowance over the trimmed edge to enclose it and sew a second row of stitching 1 or 2 millimeters from the folded edge. The result is a neat enclosed seam with no raw edge sticking out. The finished seam width is usually about 0.5 or 1 centimeters. This seam perfect for bedding, garments made from lightweight fabric without lining, and of course, for denim. I absolutely love how it looks and how well it holds. Strong, clean, and beautiful. The Welt seam, one of my favorites for lining garments. I often use this seam to make sure the lining doesn't turn outwards and everything looks neat and secure. Start by placing the fabric pieces right side together and stitch with the seam allowance wide. Don't forget to press the seam, then press it towards the lining sides. Next, stitch the lining side with seam allowances very close, about 1 or 2 millimeters from the main seam. This creates the welt which locks the seam in place and prevents the lining from flipping out. The result is very clean, tidy, and professional finish, especially useful when working with lining fabrics. Raw edge finish, simple and stylish. I love using this technique especially on knits when I want to give a piece a relaxed, grungy vibe. It's super easy, just sew a straight stitch 2 or 3 millimeters from the raw edge. That stitched line keeps the fabric from unraveling and helps the edge stay in shape. Don't forget to press the seam, it always makes everything look more polished. This finish is my husband's favorite. Pretty much all his t-shirts are done like this. It works great for lightweight, unstructured garments. Clean, finished hem, neat and versatile. You can spot this hem finish in almost any garment, on sleeves, pant hems or skirt. No matter if you're working with thick fabric or something really lightweight, it can be either wide or narrow, but the idea is the same. First, fold the raw edge to the wrong side by about 0.5-0.7 centimeters to enclose the raw edge. Then sew a machine top stitch about 1 or 2 millimeters from the folded edge. It's simple technique but gives you a super clean and polished finish. And it works just about anywhere. If you are aiming for that professional look, definitely give this hem a go. Clean finished seam or Moscow seam. To sew a Moscow seam, start by folding the seam allowances to the wrong side by about 0.5 centimeters. Press it well to keep everything flat and tidy. Then stitch close to the folded edge about 2 millimeters from the edge. Next, carefully trim the excess seam allowance, fold the edge again, and sew a second line of stitching directly on top of the first one. This gives you a neat double-stitched finish with no raw edges visible. The Moscow seam looks very refined and clean. It's especially beautiful on lightweight fabrics like BOYA, batiste, or even silk scarves. I love using it when I want a soft, polished look with a truly professional touch. Lace and trim seam finish. I spotted this finishing technique on a skirt from a fashion brand and instantly knew I had to try it myself. First, I pin the lace trim along the bottom edge of the piece on the right side and stitch it in place. Then I press the lace upwards to the wrong side of the fabric. Next, I trim down the seam allowance to keep everything neat and sew one more line of stitching along the lace from the wrong side. This way, the raw edge gets fully enclosed. The result is a super clean and beautiful finish without using a serger. Plus, it adds a decorative touch. This technique looks amazing on skirts, tops, or even the hem of a dress. First, I want to show you how easy it is to make your own bias tape. Take a square of fabric in any size you need. For example, mine is 20 by 20 centimeters. Cut it diagonally. Next, fold the resulting triangles as demonstrated in the video and sew a seam about 0.5 centimeter from the edge on your sewing machine. Don't forget to press all the seam carefully. Now, mark the width of the bias tape you want for your project. Fold the tape. First fold the edges, then fold again with an offset equal to the width sew along the fold and press the seam open again. Cut along the marked line and voila, you have a perfect bias tape. To make the bias tape even neater and easier to work with, you can feed it through a bias tape maker on your iron. The machine-bound seam with enclosed edge is a great way to neatly finish edge without a lining. Here's how I do it. First, sew the bias tape to the garment seam allowances about 0.5 centimeters from the edge. Then carefully wrap the seam allowance with the bias tape, fold the edge of the tape under and top stitch it very close to the edge about 2 millimeters. This method works perfectly for finishing raw edge when there's no lining but you want a clean and a durable finish. And by the way, if you choose a bias tape in a contrasting or brighter color, it adds a nice decorative touch too. You can also use the same technique to attach a waistband, but that's a topic for another video. The machine stitched facing seam with a close bias tape is one of my favorite finishing techniques. We start by attaching the bias tape to the edge of the fabric, sewing about 0.5 centimeters from the raw edge. Then carefully trim down the seam allowance on the main fabric to about 2 millimeters. This creates a slight roll where the main fabric subtly rolls over the edge. Next, fold the raw edge of the bias tape inward and turn the tape to the wrong side of the garment. Give it a good press to hold everything in place, and the final touch, top stitch the bias tape close to the edge. I often use this finish for hems, sleeves, pocket facing and other garment details. It gives a clean and polished look while also adding a little something special, especially when the bias tape is contrasting or made from a fun fabric. The bone connection seam, or as I like to call it, the sandwich seam. It's as simple. Place the main fabric pieces right side together and sandwich seam between two strips of bias tape, each about 4 centimeters wide. Then sew a seam about 1 or 1.5 centimeters from the edge. Heat over to the iron, press the seam well, and then press the seam allowances open. Next, fold the bias tape along the seam allowance and wrap it neatly around it. If it feels too bulky inside, you can trim down the inner seam allowance of the bias tape to reduce thickness. Secure everything with pins and iron or bolts to keep it all in place. Now top stitch the bias tape close to edge about 1 millimeter in and give it a final press to finish. The seam is done and it looks super neat. This technique is great for unlined garment or fabrics that fry easily. Tested and loved. I have a 4-thread overlocker, the Janome 8002D. It's a pretty standard serger, nothing too professional. I don't use it that often, mainly for needs and projects with elastic, or when there's simply no other way to finish something or I need to sew really fast. Honestly, it's a super useful machine, but it definitely has a personality. Every serger likes its own little universe, and it absolutely needs to be adjusted to your own preferences, or more accurately to the personality of your specific machine. On this overlocker, I set all the thread tension to level 7. That's the only setup that gives me the stitch quality I'm happy with. I'll be sewing with the knife engaged because that way the seam come out neater and more even. The connecting seam is one of the simplest. I place the fabric pieces right side together or wrong side together if I want to create a decorative seam, and simply sew along the edge, finishing it at the same time with an overlock stitch. After that, I always press the seam and then press the seam allowance to one side. It makes everything look much neater. This seam works great for knit fabrics, t-shirt, hoodies, zip-up jackets, everything stretchy that needs an elastic and durable seam. The plain seam with overlocked edges is a true classic you'll find in almost every garment. First, I finish the raw edge of the fabric pieces on the overlocker and give them a good press, because let's be honest, nothing in sewing works well without an iron. Then I place the pieces right side together, align the edges and stitch the seam. After that, I press the seam open and voila, it looks super neat and clean. This seam is not only strong and reliable, but it also looks nice, especially if you like things to be tidy on the inside too. And the best part, it's quick and easy to sew. A hem with a folded edge and overlocked finish using the blind stitch. Super neat and professional. First, finish the raw edge on the overlocker and press them well. Next, fold the edge to the desired width on the iron, then unfold and fold again as shown in the video. Press everything carefully to hold it in place. Now, take your regular sewing machine and find the presser foot with a guide. Usually, it's included in beginner kits. On my machine, I select the blind hem stitch. Mine is marked as F. I manually adjust the foot position so the straight stitched line up exactly over the overlocked edge and the zigzag tip just barely touch the fold edge. After setting the guide, I sew the seam calmly and smoothly, and the end hit back to the iron, unfold the hem and give it a good final press. And voila! You get a seam that's invisible from the right side, especially if you use thread that matches your fabric. This technique is perfect for clean and professional finishing of hems and sleeves. Machine top stitched seam with a surrogate edge, simple, quick and beautiful. First, finish the raw edge with an overlocker stitch so everything looks neat. Then, turn the surrogate edge to the inside. This will hide it and press it well. Next, place this piece with the prepared edge onto the right side of the other piece. Align everything carefully so it matches perfectly. Stitch just 1 millimeter from the folded edge right next to it. After that, give the seam a good press, and that's it. Your seam is done. I love using this technique on pockets. It's look stylish, holds firmly, and is sewing in no time. And our last seam for today is a roll hem. Let's move on to setting up the circle. Open the inner compartment, remove the knife and set the differential fit to air. Next, you can either put the knife back or leave it off. It depends on your fabric and personal preference. Set the stitch width to R as well and the stitch length to 1. Don't forget to remove the left needle. Now, just sew the seam. And of course, don't forget the iron. Press the seam nicely. You'll get such a beautiful and neat stitch. The rolled hem is often used for finishing edge on knits and very lightweight fabrics. It looks absolutely stunning. Well, that's it for today. I've shared all my favorite and most used seams with you. Of course, there's so many more types and variation out there. Every sewist or designers can come up with their own unique way of doing things. That's the magic of sewing. isn't it? My biggest tip before stitching on your actual garment, always test your seam on a scrap of the same fabric. Adjust the thread tension, stitch width and length. It's the only way to get that perfect result. And that applies to both the sewing machine and the serger. Don't skip testing. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. I really hope it was helpful and inspiring for you. If it was, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more sewing guides like this coming soon. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it and let me know in the comments what's your favorite seams. See you next time. Bye bye.